Good morning, everyone. It was at the hour of sunset that they came to the foot of the mountain. There was in that place no sign of life, neither token of water, nor trace of plant, nor shadow of flying bird. Nothing but desolation rising to desolation, and the summit was lost in heaven. Then the Bodhisattva said to his young companion, "What you have asked to see will be shown to you. But the place of vision is far, and the way is rude. Follow after me and do not fear. Strength will be given to you." Twilight gloomed about them as they climbed. There was no beaten path, nor any mark of former human visitation. And the way was over an endless heaping of tumbled fragments that rolled or turned underneath the foot. Sometimes a mass dislodged would clatter down with hollow echoings. Sometimes the substance trodden would burst like an empty shell. Stars pointed and thrilled, and the darkness deepened. "Do not fear, my son," said the Bodhisattva, guiding. "Danger there is none, though the way be grim." Under the stars they climbed, fast, fast, mounting by help of power superhuman. High zones of mist they passed, and they saw below them, ever widening as they climbed, a soundless flood of cloud like the tide of a milky sea. Hour after hour they climbed, and forms invisible yielded to the tread with dull, soft crashings, and faint, cold fires lighted and died at every breaking. At once, the pilgrim youth laid hand on something smooth that was not stone, and lifted it, and dimly saw the cheekless jibe of death. "Linger not thus, my son," urged the voice of the teacher. "The summit that we must gain is very far away." On through the dark they climbed, and felt continually beneath them the soft, strange breakings, and saw the icy fires worm and die, till the rim of the night turned gray, and the stars began to fail, and the east began to bloom. Yet still they climbed, fast, fast, mounting by help of power superhuman. About them now was frigidness of death and silence tremendous. A gold flame kindled in the east. Then, first, to the pilgrim's gaze, the steeps revealed their nakedness, and a trembling seized him, and a ghastly fear. For there was not any ground, neither beneath him, nor about him, nor above him, but a heaping only monstrous and measureless, of skulls and fragments of skulls, and dust and bone, with a shimmer of shed teeth strewn through the drift of it, like the shimmer of scrags of shell in the rack of a tide. "Do not fear, my son," cried the voice of the Bodhisattva. "Only the strong of heart can win to the place of vision." Behind them, the world had vanished. Nothing remained but the clouds beneath and the sky above, and the heaping of skulls between, up slanting out of sight. Then the sun climbed with the climbers, and there was no warmth in the light of him, but coldness sharp as a sword. And the horror of stupendous height, and the nightmare of stupendous depth, and the terror of silence ever grew, and weighed upon the pilgrim, and held his feet, so that suddenly all power departed from him, and he moaned like a sleeper in dreams. "Hasten, hasten, my son," cried the Bodhisattva. "The day is brief, and the summit is very far away." But the pilgrim shrieked, I fear unspeakably, and the power has departed from me." "The power will return, my son," made answer the Bodhisattva. "Look now below you, and above you, and about you, and tell me what you see." "I cannot," cried the pilgrim, trembling and clinging. "I dare not look beneath. Before me and about me there are nothing but skulls of men." "And yet, my son," said the Bodhisattva, laughing softly, "and yet you do not know of what this mountain is made." The other, shuddering, repeated, "I fear, unutterably I fear. There is nothing but skulls of men." "A mountain of skulls it is," responded the Bodhisattva. "But know, my son, that all of them are your own. Each has at some time been the nest of your dreams and delusions and desires. Not even one of them is the skull of any other being. All without exception, have been yours in the billions of your former lives." So this is from a book called In Ghostly Japan, which was published in 1899. The author who wrote it has sort of almost a hometown connection here. And I used some of his stories the last time I did this. So for you that are new here, for the last few years, I do these like Halloween special talks. there's a rich tradition of ghost stories in both China and Japan that are strongly related to Buddhism. They often have sort of Buddhist morality tales mixed in with them. And so I sort of try to find stories that are appropriate somewhat for us in October. So this is from a book, like I said, that was published in 1899. The author is called Lafcadio Hearn, who's an interesting person. He was born in, I think, in Greece, actually, and then grew up in Ireland, moved to Cincinnati, which, of course, is fairly close to here. And then once he was kind of an adult, he became a journalist and moved to New Orleans and spent a number of years writing about things there. And then when he was older, I think in 1890, he moved to Japan as a correspondent, really fell in love with the country. He married a Japanese woman and spent the rest of his life doing sort of publications of things towards a Western audience about Japan. And he had this real interest in ghost stories, so they're called kaidan in Japanese. And he's not like a household name in Japan, but he's still respected. So almost immediately after he published these things in English, some of them were translated into Japanese, because he would often get these stories not from translations, but from like talking to people and recording the stories. So some of them aren't recorded elsewhere. And there's a somewhat famous Japanese movie from the 1960s called Kaidan that's based on one of these books of stories. So let's see. So this story, obviously the one that I just read, has very clear Buddhist undertones, despite being a little scary. So of course, in the Buddhist tradition, rebirth is sort of a fundamental concept. I think Western Buddhists, modern Buddhists, even in Japan, probably don't really literally believe in rebirth so much anymore. Some do. I don't think there's really a conflict there exactly, because I think the idea of rebirth, right, is to encourage us to be our best selves, so that our next rebirth can be a good one that's favorable to attaining awakening, or one that's comfortable. And regardless of whether or not we believe that that's true, it behooves us to do our best in this life that we have now. And then, of course, sometimes it gets turned into a little bit of a metaphorical understanding. So moment by moment, we're reborn, right? So I might be feeling very comfortable and sort of like a god in the heavens at one point, and in another moment, I might be stricken by anguish and feel like I'm in hell. And so you can take all those skulls to be all of these momentary thoughts that arise that we, just let go moment by moment in Zazen. So for every thought that we open the hand of thought around, that's one skull in our big mountain of skulls. And I like that story too, because it's, in school I had to read Dante's Inferno. I don't know if anyone else has had to read that. But it's quite a similar sort of setup, right? Because in that story, Dante is guided by Virgil through hell to get this tour, and we sort of have a similar feeling there. So going back to this genre of stories, kaidan, I think I mentioned this the last time that I used some of these stories, but there was a popular game among sort of wealthy people in the Edo period, called Hyaku Monogatari Kaiden Kai, which was like 100 tales of these strange stories, and a meeting of people to do that. And what they would do was you'd have this one room that had 100 paper lanterns and a mirror set up. And then in the other room, people would take turns telling these scary stories. And after each one, the teller would have to go in and put out one of the lights, and so the room would get darker and darker and darker as you had to encounter this creepy mirror. So these kinds of stories were told apparently during this game. So the next story that I have is a little bit of a longer one, and maybe the Japanese speakers in the room know it. It's called Rokuro Kubi. And This is from another book by Hearn. And I should, again, I mentioned these often have a connection with Buddhism. Very often the hero is a priest, so they're kind of fun for that reason too. Okay, so this story, Rokuro Kubi. Nearly 500 years ago, there was a samurai named Isogai Heida Zaemon Taketsura in the service of Lord Kikuji of Kyushu. This Isogai had inherited from many warlike ancestors a natural aptitude for military exercises and extraordinary strength. While yet a boy, he had surpassed his teachers in the art of swordsmanship, in archery, and in the use of the spear, and had displayed all the capacities of a daring and skillful soldier. Afterwards, in the time of the Eikyo War, he so distinguished himself that high honors were bestowed upon him. But when the house of Kikuji came to ruin, Isogai found himself without a master. He might then easily have obtained service under another daimyo, that's like a feudal lord, but as he had never sought distinction for his own sake alone, and as his heart remained true to his former lord, he preferred to give up the world. So he cut off his hair and became a traveling priest, taking the Buddhist name of Kairyo. So just like we receive dharma names, this is his dharma name now, Kairyo. But always under the koromo of the priest, this is the koromo, this garment, which will come into play later. Kairyo kept warm within him the heart of the samurai. As in other years, he had laughed at peril, so now also he scorned danger. And in all weathers and all seasons, he journeyed to preach the good dharma in places where no other priest would have dared to go. For that age was an age of violence and disorder, and upon the highways there was no security for the solitary traveler, even if he happened to be a priest. In the course of his first long journey, Kairyo had occasion to visit the province of Kai. This is today's Yamanashi Prefecture, which is where Mount Fuji is. So a very mountainous place. One evening, as he was traveling through the mountains of that province, darkness overcame him in a very lonesome district, leagues away from any other village. So he resigned himself to pass the night under the stars, and having found a suitable grassy spot by the roadside, he lay down there and prepared to sleep. He had always welcomed discomfort, and even a bare rock was a good bed for him, when nothing better could be found than the root of a pine tree an excellent pillow. His body was iron, and he never troubled himself about dews or rains or frost or snow. Scarcely had he lain down when a man came along the road carrying an axe and a great bundle of chopped wood. This woodcutter halted on seeing Kairyo lying down, and after a moment of silent observation, said to him in a tone of great surprise, "What kind of a man can you be, good sir, that you dare to lie down alone in such a place as this? There are haunters about here, many of them. Are you not afraid of hairy things?" "My friend," cheerfully answered Kairyo, "I'm only a wandering priest, a cloud and water traveler, as folks call it, and I am not in the least afraid of hairy things, if you mean demon foxes or demon badgers or any creatures of that kind." In Japanese folklore, foxes and badgers are said to be able to transform into other shapes and forms. "As for lonesome places, I like them. They are suitable for meditation. I am accustomed to sleeping in the open air, and I have learned never to be anxious about my life." "You must indeed be a brave man, Sir Priest," the peasant responded, "to lie down here. This place has a bad name, a very bad name, but as the proverb has it, the superior man does not needlessly expose himself to peril, and I must assure you, sir, that this is a very dangerous place to sleep. Therefore, although my house is only a wretched thatched hut, let me beg of you to come home with me at once. In the way of food, I have nothing to offer you, but there is a roof at least, and you can sleep under it without risk." He spoke earnestly, and Kairyo, liking the kindly tone of the man, accepted this modest offer. The woodcutter guided him along a narrow path, leading up from the main road through mountain forests. It was a rough and dangerous path, sometimes skirting precipices, sometimes offering nothing but a network of slippery roots for the foot to rest upon, sometimes winding over or between masses of jagged rock. But at last, Kairyo found himself upon a cleared space at the top of a hill, with a full moon shining overhead, and he saw before him a small thatched cottage, cheerfully lighted from within. The woodcutter led him to a shed at the back of the house, whither water had been conducted through bamboo pipes from some neighboring stream, and the two men washed their feet. Beyond the shed was a vegetable garden and a grove of cedars and bamboos, and beyond the trees appeared the glimmer of a cascade, pouring from some loftier height and swaying in the moonshine like a long white robe. As Kairio entered the cottage with his guide, he perceived 4 persons, men and women, warming their hands at a little fire kindled in the ro. The ro is like sort of a hearth in traditional Japanese homes. They bowed low to the priest and greeted him in the most respectful manner. Kairio wondered that persons so poor and dwelling in such solitude should be aware of the polite forms of greetings. These are good people, he thought to himself, and they must have been taught by someone well acquainted with the rules of propriety. Then turning to his host, the aruji, or housemaster, as the others called him, Kairio said, "From the kindness of your speech and from the very polite welcome given me by your household, I imagine that you have not always been a woodcutter. Perhaps you formerly belonged to one of the upper classes?" Smiling, the woodcutter answered, "Sir, you are not mistaken. Though now living as you find me, I was once a person of some distinction. My story is the story of a ruined life, ruined by my own fault. I used to be in the service of a daimyo, and my rank in that service was not inconsiderable. But I loved women and wine too well, and under the influence of passion I acted wickedly. My selfishness brought about the ruin of our house and caused the death of many persons. Retribution followed me, and I long remained a fugitive in the land. Now I often pray that I may be able to make some atonement for the evil which I did, and to reestablish the ancestral home. But I fear that I shall never find any way of so doing. Nevertheless, I try to overcome the karma of my errors by sincere repentance, and by helping, as far as I can, those who are unfortunate." Kairio was pleased by this announcement of good resolve, and he said to the aruji, "My friend, I have had occasion to observe that man prone to folly in their youth may, in after years, become very earnest in right living. In the Holy Sutras, it is written that those strongest in wrongdoing can become, by power of good resolve, the strongest in right doing. I do not doubt that you have a good heart, and I hope that better fortune will come to you. Tonight, I shall recite the sutras for your sake, and pray that you may obtain the force to overcome the karma of any past errors." With these assurances, Kairio bade the aruji good night, and his host showed him to a very small side room where a bed had been made ready. Then all went to sleep, except the priest, who began to read the sutras by light of a paper lantern. Until a late hour, he continued to read and pray. Then he opened a little window in his little sleeping room to take a last look at the landscape before lying down. The night was beautiful. There was no cloud in the sky. There was no wind, and the strong moonlight threw down sharp black shadows of foliage and glittered on the dews of the garden. Shrillings of crickets and bell insects made a musical tumult, and the sound of the neighboring waterfall deepened with the night. Kairio felt thirsty as he listened to the noise of the water, and remembering the bamboo aqueduct at the rear of the house, he thought that he could go there and get a drink without disturbing the sleeping household. I think I might take a little drink here as well. Very gently, he pushed apart the sliding screens that separated the rooms from the main apartment, and he saw, by the light of the lantern, 5 recumbent bodies without heads. For one instant, he stood bewildered, imagining a crime. But in another moment, he perceived that there was no blood, and that the headless necks did not look as if they had been cut. Then he thought to himself, either this is an illusion made by demons, or I have been lured into the dwelling of Rokuro Kubi. In the book of So Shinki, this is In Search of the Supernatural, this is a 4th century Chinese collection of tales, it is written that if one finds the body of a Rokuro Kubi without its head, to remove the body to another place, the head will never be able to join itself again to the neck. And the book further says that when the head comes back and finds that its body has been moved, it will strike itself upon the floor 3 times, bounding like a ball, and will pant as in great fear and presently die. Now, if these be Rokuro Kubi, they mean me no good, so I shall be justified in following the instructions of the book. So he seized the body of the aruji by the feet, pulled it to the window, and pushed it out. Then he went to the back door, which he found barred, and he surmised the heads had made their exit through the smoke hole in the roof, which had been left open. Gently unbarring the door, he made his way to the garden, and proceeding with all possible caution to the grove beyond it. He heard voices talking in the grove, and he went in the direction of the voices, stealing behind shadow to shadow until he reached a good hiding place. Then, from behind a trunk, he caught sight of the heads, all 5 of them, flitting about and chatting as they flitted. They were eating worms and insects which they found on the ground or among the trees. Presently, the head of the Aruji stopped eating and said, "Ah, that traveling priest who came tonight, how fat all his body is. When we have eaten him, our bellies will be filled. I was foolish to talk to him as I did. It only set him to reciting the sutras on our behalf. To go near him while he is reciting would be difficult, and we cannot touch him so long as he is praying. But as it is now nearly morning, perhaps he has gone to sleep. Some one of you go to the house and see what the fellow is doing." Another head, the head of a young woman, immediately rose up and flitted to the house, lightly as a bat. After a few minutes it came back and cried out huskily in a tone of great alarm, "That traveling priest is not in the house, he's gone. But that's not the worst of the matter. He has taken the body of our Aruji, and I do not know where he has put it." At this announcement, the head of the Aruji, distinctly visible in the moonlight, assumed a frightful aspect. Its eyes opened monstrously. Its hair stood up bristling, and its teeth gnashed. Then a cry burst from its lips, and weeping tears of rage, as it exclaimed, "Since my body has been moved, to rejoin it is not possible. Then I must die, and all through the work of that priest. Before I die, I will get at that priest. I will tear him. I'll devour him. And there he is, behind that tree, hiding behind that tree. See him, the fat coward?" In the same moment, the head of the Aruji, followed by the other 4 heads, sprang at Kaidio. But the strong priest had already armed himself by plucking up a young tree, and with that tree he struck the heads as they came, knocking them from with them with tremendous blows. 4 of them fled away, but the head of the Aruji, though battered again and again, desperately continued to bound at the priest, and at last caught him by the left sleeve of his robe. Kaidio, however, as quickly gripped the head by its top knot and repeatedly struck it. It did not release its hold, but it uttered a long moan and thereafter ceased to struggle. It was dead. But its teeth still held to the sleeve, and for all his great strength, Kaidio could not force the jaws open. With the head still hanging to his sleeve, he went back to the house, and there caught sight of the other 4 Rokuro-kubi squatting together, with their bruised and bleeding heads reunited to their bodies. But when they perceived him at the back door, all screamed, "The priest! The priest!" and fled through the other doorway out into the woods. Eastward, the sky was brightening. Day was about to dawn, and Kaidio knew that the power of the demons was limited to the hours of the darkness. He looked at the head, clinging to his sleeve, its face all fouled with blood and foam and clay, and he laughed aloud as he thought to himself, "What a miyage!" So a miyage is like a souvenir that you buy somewhere to bring home when you go on a trip. The head of a demon, after which he gathered together his few belongings and leisurely descended the mountain to continue his journey. Right on he journeyed until he came to Suwa in Shinano. So this is modern-day Nagano Prefecture. It's kind of close to where GK, our Dharma sister, lives. Suwa is like a big lake. And into the main street of Suwa he solemnly strode, with the head dangling at his elbow. Then women fainted and children screamed and ran away. And there was a great crowding and clamoring until the torite, as the police in those days were called, seized the priest and took him to jail. For they supposed the head to be the head of a murdered man who, in the moment of being killed, had caught the murderer's sleeve in his teeth. As Kaidio, he only smiled and said nothing when they questioned him. So after having passed a night in prison, he was brought before the magistrates of the district. Then he was ordered to explain how he, a priest, had been found with the head of a man fastened to his sleeve, and why he had dared thus shamelessly to parade his crime in the sight of people. Kaidio laughed long and loudly at these questions, and then he said, "Sirs, I did not fasten the head to my sleeve. It fastened itself there, much against my will. And I have not committed any crime, for this is not the head of a man, it is the head of a demon. And if I caused the death of the demon, I did not do so by any shedding of blood, but simply by taking the precautions necessary to assure my safety." And he proceeded to relate the whole of the adventure, bursting into another hearty laugh as he told of his encounter with the 5 heads. But the magistrates did not laugh. They judged him to be a hardened criminal, and his story an insult to their intelligence. Therefore, without further questioning, they decided to order his immediate execution. All of them except one, a very old man. This aged officer had made no remark during the trial, but after having heard the opinion of his colleagues, he rose and said, "Let us first examine the head carefully, for this, I think, has not yet been done. If the priest has spoken truth, the head itself should bear witness for him. Bring the head here." So the head, still holding its teeth to the koromo that had been stripped from Kairyo's shoulder, was put before the judges. The old man turned it round and round, carefully examined it, and discovered, on the nape of its neck, several strange red characters. He called the attention of his colleagues to these, and also had them observe the edges of the neck. Nowhere presented the appearance of having been cut by any weapon. On the contrary, the line of severance was smooth as the line at which a falling leaf detaches itself from the stem. Then said the elder, "I am quite sure that the priest told us nothing but the truth. This is the head of Rokuro Kubi. In the book Nan ho Ibutsushi, it is written that certain red characters can always be found upon the nape of the neck of a real Rokuro Kubi. These are the characters. You can see for yourself that they have not been painted. Moreover, it is well known that such demons have been dwelling in the mountains of the province of Kai from very ancient times. But you, sir," he said, as he turned to Kairyo, "what sort of sturdy priest may you be? Certainly you have given proof of a courage that few priests possess, and you have the air of a soldier rather than a priest. Perhaps you once belonged to the samurai class?" "You have guessed rightly, sir," Kairyo responded. "Before becoming a priest, I long followed the profession of arms, and in those days I never feared man or devil. My name then was Isogai Heida Zaimon Taketsura of Kyushu. There may be some among you who remember this name." At the mention of that name, a murmur of admiration filled the courtroom, for there were many present who remembered it. And Kairyo immediately found himself among friends instead of judges, friends anxious to prove their admiration by fraternal kindness. With honor, they escorted him to the residence of the daimyo, who welcomed him and feasted him, and made him a handsome present before allowing him to depart. When Kairyo left Suwa, he was happy as any priest is permitted to be in this transitory world. As for the head, he took it with him, jocosely insisting that he intended it to be a miyage, a souvenir. And now it only remains to tell what became of the head. A day or two after leaving Suwa, Kairyo met with a robber who stopped him in a lonesome place and bade him strip. Kairyo at once removed his koromo and offered it to the robber, who then first perceived what was hanging from the sleeve. Though brave, the highwayman was startled and dropped the garment, sprang back. Then he cried out, "You, what kind of priest are you? Why, you're a worse man than I am. It's true that I have killed people, but I've never walked about with anybody's head fastened to my sleeve. Well, sir priest, I suppose we are of the same calling, and I must say that I admire you. Now that the head would be of use to me, actually, I could frighten people with it. Will you sell it? You can have my robe in exchange for your koromo, and I will give you 5 ryo for the head." Kairyo answered, "I shall let you have the head and robe if you insist, but I must tell you that this is not the head of a man. It is a demon's head. So, if you buy it and have any trouble in consequence, please remember that you were not deceived by me." "What a nice priest you are," exclaimed the robber. "You kill men and jest about it. But I'm really in earnest. Here's my robe and here's that money. And let me have the head. What's the use of joking?" "Take the thing," said Kairyo. "I was not joking. The only joke, if there is to be any joke at all, is that you were fool enough to pay good money for a demon's head." And Kairyo, loudly laughing, went upon his way. Thus the robber got the head and the koromo, and for some time he played the demon priest upon the highways. But reaching the neighborhood of Suwa, he there learned that the story was in fact true, and he then became afraid that the spirit of the Rokuro Kubi might give him trouble. So he made up his mind to take back the head to the place from which it had come, and to bury it with its body. He found his way to the lonely cottage in the mountains of Kai, but nobody was there, and he could not discover the body. Therefore he buried the head by itself in the grove behind the cottage, and he had a tombstone set up over the grave. And he caused a seigaki service, this is a feeding of the hungry ghosts service, a Buddhist service, to be performed on behalf of the spirit of Rokuro Kubi. And that tombstone, known as the tombstone of the Rokuro Kubi, may be seen even unto this day. So that's the end of that one. I don't think there really is such a grave, unfortunately. So this is if you've ever looked at old kind of Edo period Japanese art, like woodblock prints, this Rokuro Kubi is kind of a common thing. There are like 2 varieties. So one variety is where the head completely detaches and can fly around. But there's another one where there's like a little kind of string that is sort of like attached from the head back to the neck. And so there are all these cool images from like the 16, 17, 1800s in Japan. of these creatures with their head extended off somewhere, sometimes like smoking a pipe. It's pretty funny. So there were a number of themes. Obviously, like the story is the main focus, right? But the Aruji, the head of household of this woodcutter's shack, explains that he once was in this high position, but it was his lust for wine and women that led to his downfall. We were talking in the Wednesday night group about the Buddhist principle of having few desires, that we should try as practitioners to reduce the number of desires for worldly things that we have. And that's kind of what this is a commentary on. So at the end, we saw that there was a hungry ghost ceremony that this robber did on behalf of these Rokuro Kubi. So a hungry ghost in our tradition is the second lowest realm of rebirth, so going back to our rebirth theme. And a hungry ghost is a sort of being who is never satisfied and is constantly hungry, and they're supposed to have these big bellies and these tiny little throats as skinny as a needle, so they can never actually consume all the stuff that they want to consume. And the Rokuro Kubi is basically kind of a version of this, right? They don't literally fit that picture, but obviously they're going out at night eating worms and trying to eat the bodies of priests. And so, the kind of moral of these stories is don't lust after wine and women, or you might become a Rokuro Kubi and get killed by a samurai guy later on. So this, when we eat oryoki meals for lunch, we always make this little offering of a few grains of rice to hungry ghosts. And at the temple where I practiced in Japan, we would always take these afterwards and put them out on this little altar in the back. And, often they just get eaten by birds or whatever in real life. But the idea is they're supposed to be an offering for these hungry ghosts. So that's the kind of service that this guy did. And that's another sort of interesting twist of the story a little bit. We don't really hear in detail, but the robber is sort of in a way kind of turned around a little bit by this, right? By realizing that he has this demon's head on his sleeve. He goes to these lengths to try to protect himself, which involves, both using his own money to buy a tombstone to sort of like appease this hungry ghost, and then also doing this service. So there you have it. Another story, the last one that I'll read, is quite brief. And a lot of these stories, were elaborated over time. So this, collection was from the early 20th century, the one that I just read. But a lot of them come from these stories called setsuwa, which means kind of like explanatory tale or spoken story or something like that. And these are quite old, so from 1,000 years ago up to 500 years ago or so. And these are sort of stories that were told to common people about often Buddhist principles. So regular people weren't learning about in-depth Buddhist philosophy, right? To the extent that they were learning about Buddhism, it was through kind of folk tales like these. And the basic sort of character of the stories in this genre is they're usually very short, so they're usually like 1 or maybe 3 or 4 pages. They often have some story about Buddhism and karma, but not always. They can also just have a very general morality. So as I was reading through, some of them are like, the moral of the story is like, don't hang around dark places late at night, or like, the moral of the story is, and some of them are sexist. One that I read was like, don't let women make decisions, like that kind of thing. So definitely very dated. But often it's, a Buddhist moral. So this last story that I'll read, and one other little tidbit about these stories, and I might have mentioned this the last time, but there's a very famous Japanese movie called Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa that some of you might know. It's based on a book that is in turn adapted from one of these stories. So they have echoes in the modern world. Okay, so this last story is called A Clerk from Higo Province Escapes from a Demon's Scheme. In olden times, there lived a clerk in Higo Province. For many years, he went to his office and worked there from morning to night. I'm not sure what they have translated as from office here. Obviously, they didn't have like office buildings back then. But one day, on account of some urgent business, he left home particularly early in the morning. Because he had no attendants, he went off alone, riding a horse. As the distance between his home and the office was not even a mile, he could have reached his office in no time, but on that day, the further he rode, the longer his way seemed to grow, and he couldn't reach the office. Along the way, he became lost and came to an open field he didn't know. Having traveled all day, night was already falling. With no place to lodge, he was alone in the field. Worrying over his plight, and hoping he might find a village, he reached the top of a low hill. Surveying the view, he noticed a well-built house. I must be close to a village, he thought, and he took heart. He hurried to the house, but could find no sign of humans there. He walked around it and called out, "Is anyone home? Would you please come out? What is the name of this village?" From inside the house, a woman's voice replied, "Who is speaking? Come in quickly." When the clerk heard the voice, he sensed something sinister. But he responded, "I've gotten lost and I have some urgent business. I can't stop here now. Would you please show me the way?" The woman replied, "Then wait a minute and I'll show you." With the woman just about to come out, he felt so afraid that he prepared to escape. Then the woman appeared and said, "Hey, stay a while." When he looked at the woman, he saw that she was as tall as the eaves of the house, and her eyes glinted brightly. "Now I know," he thought, "I've come to a demon's house," and so he tried to escape, whipping his horse. The woman cried out, "Why are you running away? Stop immediately!" When he heard this voice, his fear was indescribable indeed. Frightened out of his wits, he looked at the demon, whose height was about 10 feet, and whose eyes and mouth were spouting fire like lightning. The demon chased after him, opening her big mouth and clapping her hands. He almost fell from his horse, but he kept racing away, whipping the horse and praying in his thoughts, "Please save me, O merciful Kanon, please save my life today." Rushing, his horse stumbled, and the clerk was pitched off, and he landed in front of the horse. "Now I'll be caught and eaten by the demon," he thought. So Kanon, for those who might not know, is the bodhisattva of compassion, so a very important figure in Mahayana Buddhism. Suddenly, he noticed the opening of a cave that contained some graves, and so he dashed into it frantically. The demon cried out, "Where'd he go?" Listening as he hid, the clerk heard the demon biting away and eating the horse. Hearing the sounds, the clerk thought, "When the demon is finished eating the horse, surely it will come and eat me. But it must not realize I'm here in the cave." So he prayed without ceasing, "Oh, merciful Kanon, please save me, I pray of you." When the demon had finished eating the horse, it walked up to the mouth of the cave and called out, "That man is supposed to be my meal for today. Just catch him and give me his flesh. You always treat me so unfairly. I've had enough of this." When the clerk heard this voice, he thought, "Ah, so the demon knows I am hiding in the cave." Then a voice from inside the cave called out, "This man is my meal for today, so I can't give him to you. You've already eaten his horse." Hearing this, the clerk concluded, "Either way, I can't save my life. I thought the demon outside was the worst one, but now the one here in the cave is even more dreadful, and it's set on eating me." In his despair, he thought, "I prayed to Kanon, but my life is now fated to come to its end. This must be owing to the karma from my previous life." Meanwhile, the demon outside continued demanding to be allowed to eat the clerk who was inside the cave. But the demon inside wouldn't listen, so the demon outside finally gave up, reluctantly, and went back home. "Now the demon inside the cave will catch me and eat me," thought the clerk. But then a voice from within the cave spoke. "You were to be eaten by that demon today, but because you prayed devoutly to Kanon, you saved yourself from the disaster. From now on, you must worship the Buddha with all your heart and read the Lotus Sutra earnestly. But first of all, do you know who I am, talking to you like this?" "No," answered the clerk. The voice replied, "I am not a demon, not by any means. In ancient times, in this cave there lived a saint. He erected a stupa on the peak to the west of this place, and in it he placed the Lotus Sutra. With the passage of many years, both the stupa and the sutra decayed and vanished. Only the very first word, wonder, has remained. It is this word, wonder, who is now speaking. I reside here, and so far I have saved 999 persons who are about to be eaten by that demon. Now the number has reached 1,000, including you. You must leave here and return home quickly, and you should worship the Buddha ever more devoutly and read and accept the Lotus Sutra. On saying this, the voice summoned a courteous young man and had him lead the clerk back to his home. He bowed tearfully, and then he was able to return, following the boy. On delivering the clerk to the doorway of his home, the boy told him, "You must read and accept the Lotus Sutra with all your heart." And then he vanished into thin air. After that, the clerk bowed tearfully and entered his home at midnight. He told his parents, wife, and children everything that had happened. Hearing it, they all rejoiced and were most deeply moved. From that time on, the clerk became ever more pious. He read the Lotus Sutra and worshipped Kannon devoutly. Just think, even the one word, wonder, that remained undecayed was able to save human beings like this. How much more, then, may it save those who, with honest hearts, copy the entire Lotus Sutra? In this life, divine favor is like this. Therefore, isn't the divine favor that helps human beings escape the sufferings after death even more wonderful? And such, then, is the story that has been handed down to us. So, there you have it. You just have to read the Lotus Sutra, preferably copy the Lotus Sutra, and pray to Kannon, and everything will be fine. So this story is interesting because if you've ever read the Lotus Sutra or looked at it, a great deal of it is it telling you to copy the Lotus Sutra and to recite the Lotus Sutra. So this kind of idea comes directly out of the Lotus Sutra itself. And often, too, this idea that, if you memorize even one line or recite one line or one character from the story, it'll save you from difficulty. So this kind of thing is a common trope in East Asian folk tales and in Buddhism. The first character, so wonder is the way that it's translated here. So we call it the Lotus Sutra in English, as it's like an abbreviated title, but the full title translated from the Chinese is the Wondrous Dharma of the Lotus Sutra. Wondrous Dharma of the Lotus Sutra. And it's kind of interesting because that first character is really important in East Asian Buddhism, this wondrous, or sometimes it's subtle, or sometimes mysterious, or like alternative translations. But the actual Sanskrit title, the word is not that. It's not wondrous or subtle or anything like that. It's just true, the true Dharma. So the true Dharma of the Lotus Sutra. So I've always been interested in how this idea of sort of like translation choices or translation mistakes, maybe it's not quite a mistake. I mean, of course, the idea of subtlety or wonder can express a certain kind of truth. So it's not wrong, but it's a specific choice within the idea of truth. But how these choices can kind of take on a life of their own in the future. It reminds me, I remember when I was in school and studying like art history, I remember seeing a picture of a statue of Moses that had horns. I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but in early translations of the Bible, in Hebrew it said something like that Moses had a halo, but it was mistranslated as horns. And so he was depicted as having horns for many centuries in the European tradition. And there are a lot of things, I think, like this that become really important in East Asian Buddhism that were kind of not really there in Indian Buddhism as a part because of these choices. So with that, I think I will stop for the day. Any kind of questions or comments about these stories or the ideas that they represent or anything like that?
Well, I think it's great you're putting these in front of people because, of course, as you mentioned, there's this whole genre of Setsuma Bungaku, which is so not well known in North America. So, I mean, I didn't encounter it until after grad school. So I think it's great that you're putting those in front of us, right, as another Dharma gate. And I think the stories that you've chosen are interesting in part because they remind us about this connection between Kannon and the Lotus Sutra. Because of course there's a chapter of the Lotus Sutra that we, in the long form of our service, that we chant, right? So there's a real connection between those two things, right? So we see a lot in those stories, Lotus Sutra comes up a lot, but also we see Kannon. So I think you've provided some good illustrations, right, that we can investigate about that connection.
Yeah, I think that, in North American kind of Western Buddhism, we tend to focus pretty narrowly on kind of Buddhist philosophy and Zazen meditation. But there's, this huge tradition that sort of permeates every aspect of East Asian culture that's much harder to transmit. So, we of course in North America have kind of ghost stories that echo things from the Christian tradition, and we don't even necessarily think about them as being like Christian or something in nature. And it's sort of the same in Japan. I think a lot of the people who like this kind of literature in Japan don't really think of it as Buddhist or religious, but it's definitely there, and in some cases very explicitly so.
So I'm kind of intrigued by the idea of, that stories like these were kind of the main way that most people were encountering Buddhism in that era in Japan, and how, so like most people, even though we think of Japan and other countries as Buddhist countries, it's not that everyone was like deep into Buddhist philosophy or truly understood what Zazen is if they're in the Zen sect, and it's intriguing to me that to think of that as a way of transmitting dharma, that these stories, there is something that comes through of the way that priest sort of just, for example, the way the priest just gave up his koromo with the head on it to the robber. It reminded me of the Ryokan story, where he's sleeping in his hut and the robber comes in and he just rolls over and lets the thief take what he wants. And there's something about generosity happening there that's kind of like subtle. Generosity and kind of harmlessness. Like you get a sense of this priest being utterly, nothing to fear. And, I could see how that could be taken on by someone hearing this story. And that's really deep, subtle teaching that's getting transmitted. And it just makes me think in these times where most people who encounter Buddhism are really sort of, learning from, complex books or texts or, very heady. And so there's a way in which, even though it might seem like, now we can all receive the real Buddhism and we can, but in another way, our intellectual side might be getting in the way of really receiving those teachings. So I find that a really kind of interesting thing to play with.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and I think we can see that too in, just again, coming back to Christianity, since that's kind of the dominant religion in the US. We see that too there. Like, I remember when I was a young person and, I decided that I didn't want to be a Christian, and one of my criticisms of Christianity was Christians don't even know anything about Christianity, they go to church but they don't learn anything, and they've done these surveys, I guess, where they give people tests, I don't know, or ask them questions about aspects of the Bible or whatever, and often, religious adherents do worse than atheists, and it's sometimes depends on sect, so for example, Mormons have very good knowledge of a lot of the scripture compared to some other groups. But I think part of it is sort of like you're describing. It's like you don't necessarily need to be able to like quote like passage and verse from the Bible to like sort of know the idea. And I think that those things get transmitted in other ways. And of course, you know, going back further in the Christian tradition, you know, and like back in medieval Europe, most people were illiterate, and a lot of the teaching would take place by like the murals on the wall and that sort of thing. Rather than from the service itself, which would have been in Latin, which people wouldn't have been able to understand, which is much like Buddhism. We do everything in Sino-Japanese that normal people can't understand. So yeah, it becomes stories like these that can kind of transmit something of the essence without really the sort of in-depth philosophical backing, maybe. So yeah, I think that they have kind of an important place, and I think it's an interesting thing to think about as a priest. Like, you know, how might we try to tap into that kind of style of teaching? Certainly, like normally when I give Dharma talks, I tend to have that sort of intellectualizing mindset, but it would be nice to sort of develop a more folksy approach. So yeah, I think it's an interesting point.
You have a background in Germanic studies, so you probably have listened to a lot of the old German stories, which are designed to steer children, to make them behave well and so forth.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm thinking here with some of these Japanese stories. It seems like that's a very common feature of many cultures, to tell stories like this to children, that we learn better through narrative than we do just abstract statements of fact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, for better or worse, like the average person is not going to be interested in reading, you know, a sort of philosophical treatise, but most people like hearing stories. So it kind of, lends itself as a way to transmit some kind of kernel within that kind of package of the fun story. So yeah, I think that makes sense.
I was wondering, you know, the one word from the Lotus Sutra, the opening word, that sounds a little bit like Nichiren Buddhism.
Yeah, right.
Just summarize it down into Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and all you have to do is chant that and whatever, you know, that would be enough to carry you through.
Yeah, the story actually predates Nichiren Buddhism, interestingly. So this collection is like from the 12th century, so it's before Dogen, before Pure Land Buddhism, before Nichiren. But you can see that stream of kind of thinking was already there, and the importance of the Lotus Sutra. So yeah, I mean, you're right. And of course, like I said too, the Lotus Sutra itself kind of lends itself to that interpretation, because it's always telling you how powerful the words in the text are. So you can definitely see like where Nichiren Buddhism came from. For those who don't know, Nichiren Buddhism is a form of Japanese Buddhism where the main practice is reciting the title of the Lotus Sutra. And it's thought that that's kind of like it's sort of tied in with this idea that we live so many years after the Buddha's life, and so our world has become deeply degenerate, and you can't actually learn anything, or like really attain awakening anymore, because we've become too corrupted. And so the idea of Nichiren Buddhism is by simply sort of having faith in this text that kind of it can save you through its own power. So it's not like you trying to save yourself. But in our tradition, we sort of reject that viewpoint, and we...
No, we do.
I mean, to some extent. I mean, Dogen, so the founder of Soto Zen, didn't really exactly reject the idea of like times becoming degenerated, but he also said that, you know, awakening is reality itself. So there's no way that we can't have access to it, because it's all around us all the time. So it doesn't really make sense to think of not being able to attain awakening.
This idea that scriptures have magical powers, mantras.
Mm-hmm.
Remember in India, at a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, watching these monks writing down sections of sutras on little pieces of paper, and then rolling it up and sticking them inside the statue of the Buddha.
Yeah.
So that when the Buddha statue is complete, it's full of sutras, all these little sutras.
Yeah, and that was in the story right there. You know, it said that there was a stupa with the Lotus Sutra inside, and you know the only thing remaining was the the one character. So it's the same thing right there in the story. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it extends to other things too, like Todo-san is preparing to give a series of Dharma talks on Dogen's Keisa Kudoku, so about the Buddhist robe, and it's kind of much the same. There are a lot of stories in there about if you have only 4 inches of one thread of the Okesa, you know, it can save you from danger. And then, you know, likewise texts, you know, so we have this cover for, you know, sutras, and usually I just have my notes in here, but and this is kind of supposed to be like clothing. So I mentioned this to Aisho last time, that, you know, in East Asia, the left side goes on top, and the right, so you can see it with the collars, right? So the left one is on top, the left is underneath, or sorry, the right is underneath. And then when you die, they're switched. So they would be the other way around. So a mistake that a lot of people make with these wrapping cloths is to do it backwards, because it's facing towards you. It's supposed to be from the perspective of the text. So the text is this way, so it should be the left on top, but as you're looking at it, it's the right side, so it's like reverse to what we normally think. So at any rate, yes, text and robes and all of these things are often said to have magical powers if they're associated with the right thing, at least. But I can't guarantee that. Anything else this morning?
I do have one more.
Mm-hmm.
I've wondered, so we talked what is it called, Seijiki? Is that the ceremony of offering to the hungry ghosts, or
Oh, yeah, the
somehow
Seigaki.
Seigaki?
Okay.
I've wondered about like this practice that we have with oryoki meals, lunch meals, because I'm often the one that, you know, takes those offerings and puts them outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of wondered about like what is the, I don't know, logic of this ritual, and that if it's being offered to hungry ghosts and they basically can't eat it because their throat is too tiny, and they're just going to get another offering of something they can't eat. And so I've wondered, you know, is there some kind of teaching to be pulled there, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like offering something that can't be received?
I think that they can still eat. They can only just swallow a very, very little.
Okay.
Each time. I think the idea
We just
is.
give them a little portion.
I think the idea, right, is that their appetite far exceeds, you know, their ability to consume the thing. So that's why they have this super narrow throat. It's not that the throat's like totally closed. But yeah, I mean, it is an interesting point, because presumably any offering might be too much for them to receive. I don't know, maybe. But that could be why we give such a small amount, or justify that, because it's, what's the
7 grains.
7 grains of rice, I guess, is what you're supposed to give. And then the other thing too is, for some reason in Buddhist cosmology, the hell realms and the hungry ghost realms are actually supposed to be like sort of co-occurring with this one, but we just can't see either of those realms. We can see animals and we can see humans, but we can't see hungry ghosts or hell dwellers, and we can't see heavenly beings usually, unless they want to make themselves appear before us. So the fact that you don't see it consumed is not necessarily a problem, because they might have consumed it in their reality.
Well, I know in the Tibetan tradition, there's the soak, which is like offering to the deities, and there's lots and lots of food. But there's also a feast for the monks,
Right, yeah.
because the monks get to eat what the deities don't, and that's all of it.
Yeah, believe me, I know. When I was practicing in Japan, we got to eat all kinds of goodies.
Oh, yes.
I practiced at a temple that did many funeral kind of services, memorial services every week, and so every time a family would come to do one of those, they would bring offerings of food and drink to give to their ancestors in that case. And we ended up being the ones eating all of them, which was quite nice. Anything else this morning? Anything from anyone online?
So I guess maybe complicate Sawyer's idea a little bit about.
Sorry, I will get to you in just a sec.
Oh, my bad. I mean, you were imperceptible to me, just by virtue of how I was faced. Complicate Sawyer's idea a little bit that there might be something kind of actually richer about receiving teachings like through this kind of modality. Particularly like the last story. I mean, I think the metaphor, the takeaway, I suppose, from like more ethically speaking, is, well, if you practice well and are dedicated to compassion or whatever, that's going to ward off harm for you, right? Which, causally speaking, might be true in some sort of way. It also feels like a kind of misleading motivation in a certain way, right? As a kind of precious, self-protective, kind of clinging, don't hurt me, so I'll just be a good person, feel safe, right? So I wonder what you think about that in contrast to some other way, I suppose, of like finding practice important or like worth doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're pointing at is sort of reflects how much things have changed in sort of modern times, right? So everyone in this room is literate, I assume, and went to school, and by virtue of that knows way more than anyone probably living in this time. Even the sort of most educated people like weren't on par with someone who's like poorly educated, I'd say now. I think the idea was back then, right, was that there was this strong split between lay people and priests. So priests were sort of, thought to be getting sort of some special knowledge that sort of wasn't appropriate to give to lay people, or was a path that was too difficult for lay people. And I'd say given the times, it was like often your work was sort of life or death, like if you decided not to be a farmer or something, like if everyone became a priest, right, like the society would starve. It's not like now where, we can kind of do both things together. Things have changed quite a bit. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that if we were to go too much onto that end of like just sort of encouraging superstition or whatever, that wouldn't be good. And of course, that's not really transmitting, I think, what our tradition really wants to transmit. And in the Buddhist time, there wasn't really this division so much. Like I think when we read like Pali sutras, he's generally teaching sort of more or less the same thing to priests and lay people. Maybe more in depth for priests, but there's no like sense of like, oh, the priests just need to be like reborn in a future life so that they can do this later. I mean, there's maybe some of that, but not to the point that they can practice now also as householders. But I think that over time that division gets sharper and sharper historically. But now we're sort of back to the point where we don't really have a very strong division between what priests are trying to practice and what regular people are trying to practice, at least here in the US. So yeah, I don't think that, for me as a priest, I wouldn't want to just teach, stories that encourage people to think that, the Lotus Sutra will save them from demons. When there's actually stuff that's more useful, right? So that's the whole kind of spirit of our temple of Sanshinji, is that we want Zazen to be something important in people's modern lives. We don't want to just stick to old, outdated superstitions or ideas that don't really help us anymore. So,
well, I guess what I mean is, I was thinking, there's a way that the story is kind of literally true if it's seen.
Yeah.
Okay, so metaphorically true. Literally true if it's seen as a metaphor. Where you can remember in your own life, like any number of circumstances where it's a very charged, aggressive, potentially harmful situation, and you approach it compassionately and with a mind towards practice, and like something gets diffused, right? And like that is, I think, a good enough reason to practice, but it does feel self-protective and like kind of egoic, right?
Yeah, and I guess to follow up, you know, the idea in times past, so like in medieval Japan, for example, was that, you know, even if you did believe that people could still attain awakening, which many didn't, without being reborn somewhere else. Generally, the idea was if you were a layperson, you had absolutely no chance. Like all you could do was do good deeds and hope to be reborn as a priest or in some other universe, world system that had a good Buddha.
So you're saying that sensibility is like kind of
Yeah,
very
yeah.
new that way.
Well, and also too that like this sort of like slightly egoic but moral thing was considered sort of the best that they would be able to do. Like they wouldn't probably be able to, you know, be a full-on sort of bodhisattva style, no ego kind of person in that situation, I think. Of course, there's some stories that would cut against that, I guess, but generally speaking, I think that was kind of a societal situation.
But we do have lots of demons, like shopping malls and television, things like that, for which remembering our practice can focus our mind away from that.
That's true. So sorry, go ahead, Abby.
Yes, well, I have a comment and then a question. First of all, I love hearing these stories. That's maybe that's the child in me, but they're beautifully told and they're really wonderful folk tales. They're really wonderful. And I am familiar with this from the Jewish tradition, which also has a set of highly complex documents that have authority, but then also has what are called midrashim, which are folk tales, and which, for the less scholarly parts of the population, were a real gateway into Jewish practice. My question is about hungry ghosts. I'm not a literal believer, but I would like to understand the system. Are those consigned to the realm of hungry ghosts? Are they reborn? Do they undergo rebirth? Yes.
Yeah, so in the six realms, so it's hell dwellers, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, sort of demigods or asuras, and gods. In Buddhism, everything is impermanent, right? So there's never any eternal damnation. So in all of these places, you're constantly being reborn from one into the other. Some are said to last a very long time, so you know some of the lifespans of gods can last, you know, eons and eons, but inevitably they will be reborn again in a lower realm. And likewise, you know, if you've done very severe punishments, you might have a long stint in a particular hell. That's another thing too that would be fun, maybe for next time. But there are many elaborate hells in the Buddhist system that are often much like Dante's Inferno, you know, sort of tailored to the crime in ironic ways. But yeah, because of the centrality of impermanence in Buddhism, there's never any permanence to these, and that's kind of the impetus behind wanting to attain awakening in early Buddhism is that we're always subject to rebirth within the system. So even if you attain birth as a god, say, it has no stability in the long term, and you're always subject to falling all the way back down to a hell dweller or a hungry ghost. And so the sort of project of early Buddhism it was to escape the system of rebirth, and it was thought that by completely eliminating karma, you could attain this final nirvana and exit the system of rebirth altogether, which I find very interesting because nowadays, of course, most people, I don't know, most modern people who maybe aren't religious believe that when you die, you just die, right? And that's the end. And that was kind of the whole goal of early Buddhism, was to just die and be done with it. But now we just sort of like take that for granted as a negative thing almost. So it's very interesting, I think.
So I can imagine the little birds that eat the orioke offering. They might have been hungry ghosts at one time.
Yes, that's true. That's a good resolution.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
But you know the story of the Buddhist who dies and goes to heaven and looks around and says, "Oh no, not this again."
I haven't heard that, but yeah, that makes sense. Anything else? Okay, so I have one other thing. So I was talking with Sawyer about this the other day. So the next time I give a Dharma talk, which will probably be a few months from now, I'm going to talk about running, how running can be sort of like a zazen type practice. Because I've gotten into running as I'm getting older. I'm almost 40, and so I'm trying to be more health conscious. And I've gotten into this regular practice, and pretty immediately was like, oh, this is kind of a lot like zazen, because you don't really have a lot of distractions. Your mind is still kind of there, and thoughts are coming and going as you move. And so I'm kind of interested in this connection. Like running as sort of exercise didn't exist until kind of recently. But there are some connections there, and I'll talk more about that later. But for now, I wanted to sort of use the opportunity. So as I'm sort of getting more into it, I'm like increasing my distance, and I've decided that I wanted to do a half marathon, which is 13.1 miles. And as is common when you do these sorts of races, they can often be used to help raise money. And we have a fall appeal right now for San Shinjin to raise money for the temple. And believe me, we could use it. This temple has a lot of expenses, and we don't have a lot of income. So I'm gonna ask people to make pledges for my run. And Sawyer might join me, possibly. I'm trying to convince him. He used to be like a real runner. I'm just an amateur. What I can offer in return, because people want something in return, right? In Japan, often when people donate to temples, like for example at Kotaiji, every morning we would recite the names of the families that gave a lot of money for the rebuilding of the temple. So it's kind of it's not a great thing in a way, because it privileges wealthy people over people who don't have the means to give those kinds of things, I think. But basically what you're doing, right, is you're offering these sutras and then kind of transferring some of the merit to that family, like you're giving them credit for it, kind of, but also giving it to all beings, So my offer is, I found that as I run, I like to recite the sutras that we do in the morning, because we do them with this mokunkyo, so each beat is like one syllable. So it lends itself to running, because it's like one step, one syllable. And it keeps your mind kind of occupied and away from my legs hurt or whatever. So any amount that you give, it could be 50 cents, I can recite something on your behalf, on behalf of a loved one, someone recently departed, some aspiration that you have, whatever it might be. I will chant, and I've figured out there's different things that I can do. I can only chant 3 or 4 texts from memory, but the Heart Sutra, for example, takes me a minute and 15 seconds about, so I can chant that over the course of a half marathon almost 100 times. So I have lots of capacity for offerings.
We often say there are many ways to give.
Yes. So this is one of
Doju
the
is
ways.
now expanding it significantly.
So if you'd like to make a pledge, you can either just tell me afterwards and I can note it down, or you can email me. My email address is doju, so DOJU, .layton, LAYTON, at sunshinji.org. And depending on whether or not I can rope Sawyer in, we'll have to work out exactly when it's going to happen, but probably sometime in the late winter, early spring next year. But we do want to make it for the fall fund drive, just to not confuse our finances. So with that, I'll wrap things up, and we can move on to the World Peace Ceremony, where we will dedicate the merit of that to world peace, and not to any particular person. So thank you.